Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, welcome along on tonight's Mark Steyn Show, live on your telly and live on your wireless. As the second month of war begins, who's winning? Other than China, of course. And are we setting up the Platinum Jubilee to be one almighty dud? A great historian, David Starkey, is going to be here to give us the big picture on our world today, plus your thoughts live and in real time, so do send them along by email to gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can Twitter me at gbnews. All that coming up, as always, after the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. NATO and G7 leaders are ramping up lethal aid to Ukraine. Speaking after emergency meetings in Brussels, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said military kit will be provided in the quantity and quality needed so the country can defend itself against Russia.
Ukraine is not alone. We stand with the people of Kiev, of Mariupol, of Lviv and Donetsk. And as President Zelensky has said himself, the people of Ukraine will prevail, and Putin must fail, and he will fail.
P&O Ferries has admitted breaking the law when it sacked 800 workers without notice last week. Chief Executive Peter Hebblethwaite acknowledged trade unions should have been consulted first when he was questioned by MPs. He also told them the new crews are being paid below the UK's minimum wage on international routes, but he insists it is legal.
We thought long and hard about the routes to this, and we did consider every single option available to us, and we concluded that every single option available to us would result in the closure of P&O.
You haven't escaped the law of this country. You've still got to do it within the legal framework. You can't just decide that you're going to absent yourself from the legal system of the United Kingdom.
So it was our assessment that the change was of such a magnitude that no union could possibly accept our proposal.
Oh, you're right about that, Mr. I've never heard such farcical answers to a series of questions.
Jurors have been shown footage of the moment the man accused of murdering Sir David Amess was arrested. Prosecutors say 26-year-old Ali Harbi Ali stabbed the MP in his constituency in Essex last October. Video evidence shows him describing the incident as both terror-related and as having religious motivations. Ali, who denies preparing terrorist acts and murder, was tackled to the ground by two plainclothes officers.
Get it down! We got him. Right, search him. Right, mate, at the moment you're under arrest for murder. All right, if you'd like to say anything, in my arm or defence, if you do not mention when mentioned something which you later on in court, anything you do say may be given as evidence. Do you understand me?
Donald Trump is suing his former opponent in the presidential election, Hillary Clinton. The ex-US president claims she and several others, including former British spy Christopher Steele, tried to rig the 2016 vote. In a lawsuit filed in Florida, Mr. Trump alleges there was a conspiracy to spread a false narrative that he was colluding with Russia to win the election. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
1 month ago, war erupted in Europe when Vladimir Putin sent his troops across the border into Ukraine. On that first night of the new war, I was fortunate enough to enjoy the benefit of David Starkey's wisdom and that of Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley, and they're both back tonight. Just to bring you up to speed with the latest developments, NATO met today to project unity, but the Kremlin at least is distinguishing among the attendees and has, and this will make your heart swell with Britannic pride, the Kremlin has proclaimed Boris Johnson, quote, the most active participant in the race to be anti-Russian, which sounds almost like a threat. On the other hand, stung by Ukraine's success on social media, the Russians posted a propaganda video of their own showing one of their warships off Ukraine's Black Sea coast. Unfortunately, that video gave away the ship's location at Berdyansk, so the Ukrainians hit it and totaled it. It's a smoking ruin. Jonathan Riley has seen distinguished service in Northern Ireland, and the Irish situation vis-à-vis England, by the way, has a few similarities with Ukraine vis-à-vis Russia, although rather less, I think, than the Kremlin expected to find. Anyway, Lieutenant General Riley has seen distinguished service in Ulster, the Balkans, Iraq, all over the map, and we're glad to have him and Dr. Starkey back with us tonight as the war enters its second month. Jonathan, did you expect on February the 24th that we'd be where we are now, in which Ukraine looks at least to having a sporting chance of winning this thing on the ground without any other active participation from NATO or anybody else?
Good evening, Mark. Nice to be back with you. First of all, I completely disagree with your remarks about Northern Ireland, totally. But to go to your question, certainly not. No, and I don't think any of us did. I think we're all pretty much in awe of what the Ukrainians are doing. But stand back a little bit, and it becomes perhaps a little bit surprising. And there are two angles, I think, that we should consider. First of all, it's that the Ukrainians are making very good use of the terrain, and they're on the defense. And in particularly urban terrain and other close terrain, the defense is favored. You need a superiority of 5 to 1 anyway. And we know that as the Ukrainians called up an awful lot of reservists, they actually outnumber the Russians. So the Russians have got to move troops around, and they don't seem very good at that, to generate even a local superiority. The other thing is that perhaps the Russians are sitting on what they want to hold. Maybe they don't want to occupy the rest of the country. It would certainly be a very big ask. And they're sitting on what they want to use as a bargaining chip. And the hold-up now is how those negotiations are going, and can a deal be struck to end the war?
Just let me go back to that Irish thing, because I don't want to be misunderstood on it. But Ireland includes people who want to be just Irish, and also includes people who feel they can be Irish and British simultaneously. And Ukraine, as the Russians saw it, included people in West and Central Ukraine who generally just feel Ukrainian, but also significant people elsewhere in Ukraine who feel both Ukrainian and Russian, which has been true at various times throughout history. And one of the things, and that I think is slightly analogous to the Anglo-Irish thing, and one of the things that's been surprising about this, and certainly was true when I was there last week, is that the Russian speakers in Ukraine turn out to be overwhelmingly, in my view, actually anti-Russian. So it would be rather as if the Unionists in Northern Ireland hated England as much as Irish Republicans did. So that's the only thing I think Putin went in thinking that the Russian speakers actually wanted to be living under Vladimir Putin, and it turns out they don't. That was just my sense on the ground last week. They're as opposed to him as anybody else.
However, the Russia has actually gone to war against the people of Ukraine, whether they're Russian-speaking or Ukrainian-speaking, and however they identify themselves politically. The British Army did not, and the British government did not go to war with its own people. And although there were many mistakes during the campaign,
I certainly didn't mean. I certainly didn't mean to suggest that. I'm in favour of the union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and I'm sentimental enough to view with regret the departure of our southern compatriots from John Bull's other island. So I was just talking about the last 3 or 4 centuries of the Irish question there, John. Certainly wasn't impugning anything you'd done during your service in Ulster. So that's not what I meant at all. And I certainly hope it didn't come over as that. But looking at Putin, I think that is, a big difference, is that Putin expected to find friends on the Ukrainian side of the border. And as you know, you can factor in all kinds of things about troop deployments and hardware, but will is the critical, as Little Hart and other strategists say, will is what it comes down to in war, and will seems to favour the Ukrainians in this situation.
Yes, it certainly does. And I think that's because they are fighting for their country. And Russian soldiers are there as outsiders, trying to take something away from somebody else. And many of them may not have their hearts in the business. And having your heart in the business really matters, because far more battles are lost from want of hope than from loss of blood. That's for sure.
Are you puzzled as to what Putin's strategy is now? It seems to be shrinking. I mean, everyone expected, when we spoke a month ago, everyone thought he wouldn't have done this unless he could overwhelm the country within days and send Zelensky either scuttling west or have him hanging from a lamppost. And as that didn't happen, we've now heard more modified war aims. He wants a land corridor to Crimea, and he might want to go as far as the Dniester, although I don't actually think he's even going to get that anywhere close to that far. Can he shrink his goals and still come off a winner in this?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure that we really understand what his strategy was. My personal view is that a lot of his strategy was aimed at fracturing NATO, and he thought that by attacking NATO, he would show up by attacking Ukraine, he would show up divisions amongst the Western allies, and that some would be prepared to be hardline, others would be running scared, and that he might actually prize one or more NATO members away from the alliance. Well, I think he's probably been shaken by the unity of the alliance, the way it's responded, and the fact that its determination has got ever stronger. And he may well end up in this by engineering the very thing he wanted to avoid, which was the enlargement of NATO. And in the medium term, that will be very hard to present as a victory. But I think he, as you allude, I think he can probably rescue enough from a land grab in the Donetsk, the Crimea, and a corridor to present that as a victory back home, at least in the short term. Now, does that buy his way out of Western sanctions? Probably not.
My understanding, which is why I laid the good news, as it were, on the heads of the Ukrainians and their armed forces, is that the sanctions haven't proved as effective as they were supposed to be, whereas the Ukrainian military has. Is there a reason why the Russians are this bad? They've setting aside the disputed numbers of dead and injured, they've lost about 1,500 tanks and 1,500 armoured vehicles. So they've lost whatever that is, 6 or 7 times the total number of tanks the British Army actually has. And that's just in the first month. Why is it that they're so bad?
Well, we don't have any independent corroboration of those numbers. So I think we should be cautious about them. That's not to say that they haven't lost fairly heavily. Now, I think there are a number of things to pick out of this. One is that they have trained to confront an enemy of a type that isn't there. They've been looking for a symmetrical force-on-force battle against a big target array. And the Ukrainians have just gone underneath them, gone round them, gone over the top of them, and have hit them from behind and from the flanks and where it hurts. The other thing is that in terms of stitching together a combined arms land and air campaign, you've got to practice it. You've got to practice it. And if you don't, you can't stitch it together on the day. And it's clear that the Russians have not trained and have not trained in this enough to be good at it, nor is their tactical doctrine and their people flexible enough to adapt quickly on the ground in the way that the British and American army would have done and did in places like Iraq in the face of a changing threat.
Now you hold the rank of Lieutenant General. What we've seen on the ground in Ukraine is that Russia has lost something like 20 to 25% of the major generals it dispatched to that country because it's having these commanders leading from the front. There are only a relatively narrow set of reasons why you would do that, because you generally don't want people to pick off your generals. It's not something that happens in modern warfare. Why have the Russians had to have their generals leading from the front?
Well, of course, a few senior officers getting killed is very good for the troops' morale on both sides, both Ukrainian and Russian, trust me. When we used to study the Russians back in the Cold War, we were very aware that problems had to be solved by people of a much higher rank than we would expect to solve them. What we expected a corporal to do, they would need a colonel to do, because you're dealing with a relatively small number of professionals and a large number of conscripts. I guess that what's happening is that things are not going right, and that the generals have been having to come right forward to the front to sort out minor problems that their subordinates should be handling, but are simply not handling. And in doing that, they're doing the brave thing. They're exposing themselves to the enemy. They're leading from the front, but they're up there doing everybody's job except their own.
That's a very good way of putting it, and I think that's actually a rather interesting distinction too. That what would a corporal would be expected to take responsibility for in the British Army or the US Army, you're saying that with the Russians they need to go up to the level of colonel. That's they're running out of major generals. He doesn't have a lot of major generals to throw into the field right now. We'll see where we are. That's true. Where do you think we're going to be in another month, Jonathan?
I hope to God that we'll be in a situation where negotiation has removed the threat and the actuality of violence from people in Ukraine, particularly the civilian population, and that there is and that Russia has been put so far into a corner that not only will this be resolved, but they will not think about doing anything like this again, and that will send a message not only to the Russian leadership but also to China, because we know they're watching this hard, and we know what their intentions are with regard to Taiwan.
No, I think that's certainly true. I hear from friends in the Baltics that they're rather more relaxed than they were a month ago, because they don't think he's planning on taking back Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia anytime soon. Thank you very much for that.
That's Article 5 territory. That's Article 5 territory.
Thank you.
If he goes there, then he's taking the full weight of NATO.
And we're into World War III. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan Riley. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk or via Twitter at GBnews. David Starkey is coming up. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are in Jamaica, and we'll talk about whether the thrones will be tumbling in this year of the Platinum Jubilee. All that straight ahead. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, let's get your thoughts on the war in Ukraine as it enters its second month. And Colin says it's been going on for 8 years, actually. That's referring to the time when Putin took Crimea, which is true. He annexed part of Ukraine 8 years ago. So you're right there. John says, how about we give Putin 3 weeks to flatten Ukraine, or we'll send in Sage to scare him to death. Charlie says all this stuff about Putin losing. He's already controlling all the parts of the Ukraine he wants. The eastern regions, the southern land corridor. It will now become an occupation and war of attrition which he'll win, and the western media and public will lose interest. Wrong, Charlie, wrong. I'll have a bet with you on it. Winner buys caviar in Kharkiv. He's not gotten all the land he's wanted. He hasn't succeeded on that southern land corridor. He wanted to get to the port of Odessa. He's nowhere near it, and he's less near it than he was 3 weeks ago. And if you look at the bits the so-called bits of Ukraine he wants, they're not joined up in eastern Ukraine. They're not joined up. He wanted Zelensky gone, hanging from a lamppost. And Zelensky, whatever you feel about him, has never been further from the lamppost. Russell says, with Boris being a Russian-sounding name, should he revert? Yes, that's very interesting. Maybe we should seize Boris Johnson's super yacht or his luxury home in the Caribbean or wherever it is. With Boris being a Russian-sounding name, yes. Why does the United Kingdom have a Russian Prime Minister? Should he revert to calling himself Al Johnson, as he does among friends and family, or would people mishear that as Al Jolson and confuse him with the Prime Minister of Canada? Oh, mammy, don't bring up Al Jolson, Prime Minister of Canada. We don't need... The Queen in this Platinum Jubilee year does not need more than one of her Prime Ministers doing blackface, getting down on one knee and singing Swanee. Mark says, Boris humiliated in Europe, the royals humiliated in the Caribbean. Have we lost our way? Well, when you put it like that. Speaking of which, like many nonagenarians, the Queen has been cutting back on long-haul travel, which can be very exhausting. Unfortunately, unlike any other nonagenarian on the planet, the Queen is queen of lots of countries which are very far apart. So unlike in previous Jubilees, this year Her Majesty will not be in Canada or New Zealand, and the Platinum Jubilations are being left to her children and grandchildren. There's a constitutional wrinkle to this. When the Queen speaks in Jamaica, she speaks as Queen of Jamaica, and so her speeches are written for her by her Jamaican ministers, no different from when she makes her speech from the throne at the opening of Parliament at Westminster. In fact, the only reason she convenes and presides and speaks at the Commonwealth Conference is because half a century ago it was in Ottawa, and Pierre Trudeau, as her Canadian Prime Minister, advised her to do so. Ted Heath in Downing Street was furious about it and tried to overrule Monsieur Trudeau, but was told that as merely her UK Prime Minister, he had no say in what the Queen of Canada does on Canadian soil. Unfortunately, that doesn't apply when it's the Queen's kids or grandkids. It may seem natural in personal terms to send along your son or grandson to represent you at this or that, but they're not bound by their Canadian or Jamaican ministers. They're free to say anything they like, unconstrained by government speechwriters. As you'll know, if you've heard that nitwit Prince of Wales talk about climate change or panting hot for the Great Reset when he's at Davos. And so since the Queen's been cutting back on travel, I notice a couple of things, one of them tonal and one of them to do with content. When the Queen speaks in Belize or Australia, she does so as the legal personification of the Belizean or Australian state. That's why an old chum of mine who used to write her Canadian speeches always makes a point of throwing in some such line as, "I speak to you as Queen of Canada and of all Canadians." William and Kate seem decent and dutiful people, but they can't help giving the impression they're visitors. Visitors from a long way away. That's my tonal criticism. Content-wise, expressing their, quote, sorrow about slavery underlines that they're not speaking for the Jamaican people, as the Queen does when she's in Jamaica, but for all the ghastly English, Scottish, Irish, white people in general who are held to be responsible for all the bad things in the world today. This is very perilous territory, which largely derives from the ructions that arose in the wake of George Floyd's death 2 years ago, the worst of which is that the very particular racial paradigm of the United States is now being imposed around the planet in parts of the world which have quite different racial histories. And I'm not sure it's in the monarchy's interest to get head-faked into going along with it. At any rate, Dr. David Starkey is the guy we turn to for the grand sweep of history. David, it seems somehow odd, and it wasn't true in previous Jubilee years, that the royal family should go all over the Commonwealth and be apologising for slavery. Is this good for anyone? Is it necessary? Is it true?
It's understandable, isn't it? I mean, what else would you expect them to do? I think William handled it just about as well as he could. Interestingly enough, the term that he used, Steyn, is actually used in 1840 by Prince Albert, talking to the Society for the Abolition of Slavery. Way back then, admittedly, he's in England, but he's saying this is a stain. And who would deny that it was a stain? But you see, the other side of the story, which I think he should also have done, he should have said, yes, in the 18th century, Britain was the leading slave power. There is no doubt about that. But it is also uniquely the power that, at huge cost to itself, abolishes slavery, not only in the empire, but throughout the world. And it does so against huge resistance. This is the important thing. So he needs to say that. Because, you see, I think, again, you made a very good point about the Queen and her role. But essentially what the monarchy should be about is not choosing sides in our history. You can't do that. The monarchy should be about the recognition of the fact that we are all descendants of slavers and slaves. We are descendants of the exploiter and the exploited, of Catholic and Protestant. And that sense of reconciliation is above all true of slavery. The country, that, very briefly, I mean, the reason that we are the leading slaving power in the 18th century is because we're top nation. You get the role with the treaties of Utrecht, which represent the defeat of Louis XIV's France, and Britain gets it's Britain. You're absolutely right to say the Scots in there up to their neck. The reason that you have union with Scotland is the Scots want to participate in the empire. They're up there. They want it. And you as a Canadian know that completely. So, but what we do is we then abolish slavery. In the same way, the unique thing about the British Empire, and I wish William and Charles would also say this, the British Empire is the only empire that actually conceived of abolishing itself. That's what the Durham Report in Canada is about. After the American Revolution, the rebellion, the British Empire deliberately conceives of ending itself. It begins consciously to encourage countries to independence. So in that sense, all that's happening now in Jamaica is fulfilling the destiny that was fulfilled by Canada, by Australia, by South Africa, by India. So that seems to me, it's that sense of reconciliation that I think we should be doing. If, of course, they were being a little bit naughty, and not being the Duke of Wokerbridge, but perhaps pushing the British bit hard. You see, what they could have said in Jamaica is, would you like to have been ruled by France? Would you like to have been Saint-Domingue, which becomes Haiti? They're complaining, the politicians in Jamaica, they're all saying, we demand reparations. When you abolished slavery in 1833, you paid off the slave owners. You didn't pay off the slaves. Do you, by any chance, Mark, you're very well informed, do you actually know how Haiti got its independence from France?
Well,
Haiti, there's a vast slave revolt, which they win. They actually they're the first people to defeat Napoleon. They defeat Napoleon before we Brits did. But then, in order to get diplomatic recognition from France, do you know what the government of Haiti had to do? It had to pay the French, under a treaty of 1825, 150 million gold francs. They had to buy their liberty. And Haiti, this desperately poor society, was still paying off that loan in 1947, when, wait for you will love this, it had been bought by Citibank.
Terrific.
You see, that's the other side of the story. If you'd been French, you would have become Haiti. You'd have been ruled by the Duvalier. You would have had voodoo, and you'd have been still paying for your independence.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought up Lord Durham's report, because essentially what he recommended for Nova Scotia in 1848, when it got responsible government, has been replicated around the globe, including everywhere that William and Kate are visiting right now, such as Belize and Jamaica. I wondered if, though, and I certainly agree with you that you're better to come under the British crown than most of the available alternatives, imperially speaking. I wonder, though, bringing it up to date. Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, though, if there's not something crepuscular and Habsburgian about what's going on. There's certainly the sense that when, and I don't want to compare the Queen to Franz Josef or anything, but there's certainly the sense I get that what comes next isn't going to be as sure-footed as the Queen.
Well, I think they've all got into the habit of talking. The miracle of the Queen, and it's a debatable miracle if she never says anything. I mean, I was hugely criticised at the time of the last Jubilee by saying nobody will ever remember anything that Queen Elizabeth II said, unlike Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I is a ruler and a personality. Queen Elizabeth II is a brilliant token. She's a kind of living totem of Britishness, Canadianness, Jamaicanness, or whatever else it is. And so she only ever speaks when words are put in her mouth. The problem, of course, conspicuously with the Prince of Wales, and unfortunately his two children seem to have inherited it, they are very fond of shooting off their mouths. And this is the problem. Because the Queen is silent, you can read anything into her you like. All people can find something to identify. Once you get, of course, taking up a public position, for example, you were mocking the Prince of Wales for his ecology. Now, we are now in a world in which ecology isn't just going to be cuddly, feely-weely, and isn't it absolutely wonderful that we're nice to the planet and we adore David Attenborough. Ecology is going to come with a terrible cost. We're going to see doubling and trebling of fuel bills. We're going to see food shortages. We're going to see disputes over land use, all these sort of things. And suddenly, if you have a monarchy, and William is very much in this direction, Harry further in that direction, if you've got a monarchy which isn't just doing something that's cuddly and nice and sweet, but is actually doing something that will become a total centre of politics. The green agenda is going to become one of the big divisive issues of politics. If you have the royal house taking sides, woof.
Yeah, I think that's right. Whereas on the other hand, the principal issue apparently for the Queen's Caribbean realms, which is this whole business of racism, slavery, reparations. In fact, the one thing I think you can say the Queen did take a kind of lead in, you say that the British Empire is the first to have taken into account its dissolution, and that's why it's the only one that survives in this weird Commonwealth family, which is really something the Queen has conjured into being entirely through her own will. And if however non-racist or post-racial or however you want to put it now, the Queen was actually beyond all that at a time when most of her subjects around the planet weren't. And if you look at these, even anyone who's been in the room with the Queen for 20 minutes will recall seeing her, talking to some Nigerian novelist and laughing her socks off with him. And if you look at these photographs of her as the Commonwealth grew, with her governors general, her viceroys from around the Commonwealth, most of them are black, brown, whatever. The monarchy, in a sense, could claim to be the first non-post-racial institution in the realm, couldn't it?
Well, it goes back well beyond the Queen. Look at Victoria. At the end of her reign, once John Brown is dead, she is semi in love. Certainly with Indian private servants, the Munshi. And it's regarded as a relationship it's clearly a relationship of mistress and servant, but it's regarded as being so intimate, so shocking, that virtually every scrap of evidence about it has been destroyed, was destroyed by Victoria's successors. And again, I mentioned right at the beginning the role that Prince Albert very deliberately plays. Again, the way in which Britain, of course, the principal slaving power, can we all just put things in their proper light, is America. The reason, the Floyd thing happens is because of the extraordinary paradox of America in the 18th century rebelling in the name of liberty and yet becoming the leading slave economy. This is the problem. And the paradoxes just go endlessly. So it's Albert who actually keeps Britain out of interventions in the American Civil War. Albert has a profoundly important influence in policy. And again, what we all forget, we think of liberty and slavery as just nice opposites. In 18th century England, the people who were in favour of doing something about slavery were hard Tories. There were people like Dr. Johnson. And Dr. Johnson has this wonderful remark on the subject of slavery. Nobody yelps more loudly for liberty than a Yankee slave driver. It was the radicals. Yep. It was the Americans who were the slavers. And this is the torment of America. It's the paradox. And you know what? Because I got very interested in this subject, I was reading up on the role of Britain and the slaves during the American War of Independence. Do you know whose side most of the slaves were on in the American War of Independence? The British, for the simple reason that the British guaranteed them their liberty. And you get, as early as the 1820s, you get campaigners for abolition saying no country in the world does more for blacks than Britain. So it's this notion that we are flagellating ourselves as a role of singular wickedness is just untrue. But the biggest issue of all, Mark, is that our slave trade, the slave trade across the Atlantic, by the way, the biggest slaving power, can we all get this right, across the Atlantic is sweet little Portugal. Portugal to Brazil exports more than half the number of slaves of the entire Atlantic slave trade of its 500-year history, nearly 6 million of them. The rest are 4 million. But do you know what we forget is overwhelmingly the biggest recipient of slaves is Turkey, is the Islamic world. And in the Islamic world, it is a genuine genocide. The African slave trade is horrible, is brutal, but it's a diaspora. It's a spreading out of the black world, black culture. In the Islamic world, it is genuinely a genocide. The men are castrated, then the women, when their masters breed with them, the children, the mixed-race children, the little babies, have their brains dashed out at birth, which is why, whereas you find, millions, tens of millions of blacks in the Americas, you find hardly any in Turkey. That's why. It's a genuine genocide. And you're dealing with at least 10 million, it may be 15 million. And it is this problem. You can only judge comparatively, which is why I made the comparison with the French Empire. You can't judge between the 18th century and the 20th or the 21st, but you can compare across time with contemporaries. As I said, Haiti with Jamaica. And everybody should just be asking Jamaicans, would you really like to be Haiti?
No, I think the comparison thing is, in fact, to our credit. Everyone knows about the so-called Underground Railroad in America that blacks used to escape the plantations. People seem to forget that where that Underground Railroad terminated was in Canada, because those blacks, when they were fleeing, the best place they could flee to was somewhere under the British Crown. And I know it's a difficult thing for William or whoever to be expected to say on a Platinum Jubilee visit to Jamaica, but I wish there was a recognition of that in the wider world. Thank you, as always, David Starkey, and thank you, as always, for packing it with facts, which are an endangered species whenever we talk about this particular topic and other topics. So I thank you for that, and I hope somewhere at Buckingham Palace they're grateful for David for helping set the record straight on this thing. Whoever loses the Russia-Ukraine war, China is determined to come out the winner. Gordon Chang's going to break it all down for us. Stump the Steyn's coming up. You can ask me anything. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Twitter me at GBnews. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Earlier this week, I showed this tweet from the rather droll Twitter account of Li Zhao of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The so-called international community we're always going on about and which he mocks us about. It's North America, Western Europe, and Her Majesty's white settler dominions in the South Pacific. Apparently, as he points out, 90% of the world doesn't count as part of the international community, not China, India, Africa, Latin America. And with respect to Ukraine, there's a fair bit of truth to that. Brazil and Mexico have said they're not interested in sanctions. Our Commonwealth cousins in South Africa have inclined towards Russia, as has India, notwithstanding Putin's closeness to New Delhi's principal rival, China. The 90% of the planet that isn't in Joe Biden's international community is sitting this one out. So what's going on? Gordon Chang has studied China more closely than anyone, and his latest book is The Great US-China Tech War. Gordon, I tend to think that China has just spread so much money around the planet. I mean, we were just talking about Jamaican politicians who incline less towards London than you might expect. And in part, that's just because the Chinese have spent well over $1 billion in Jamaica, a very small island, building highways and all the rest of it. So is it just that 90% of the planet figures that China, it's more important to stay friends with China than stay friends with Joe Biden?
I think that there is a failure of American leadership. And, you know, as Osama bin Laden said, and this was the one thing that he said was correct, people, when they see a strong horse or a weak horse, they gravitate towards the strong horse. And Biden has been the weak horse. Even though the U.S. is far stronger than China when you look at the metrics, the leadership in Washington has really been disappointing. And we can see that because, you know, when you look at the U.S., 27 nations of the European Union and Great Britain, they have an economy that is greater than 25 times that of Russia's. And yet Russia invaded Ukraine anyway because there was a failure of deterrence. You know, Chinese leaders are, if nothing else, they are willful. Biden is not willful at all.
What do you think the Chinese want at the end of this war? Because Joe Biden's been on the phone with Chairman Xi, didn't get anywhere apparently, but he basically is trying to deter the Chinese from fully supporting Russia. He doesn't seem to have any pressure he can bring to bear on the Chinese Communist Party in that respect.
Yes, and that was evident from the news conference today that Biden held at NATO. Because when in response to a question, he was asked, what did you talk about with Xi Jinping? Biden didn't say that he threatened to use American power against China if it were to support the Russians more fully. What he said was, well, you know, they're U.S. companies. They left Russia. They'll leave China if you do something. And that's really a very passive sort of view of things. What Biden should have said is that the United States will use its power to force companies out of China. We will end technical cooperation agreements. We will stop investments in trade. You do something like that, then China will take notice. Because if, for instance, we were to freeze the dollar accounts of Chinese institutions, probably the Chinese economy would fail within weeks And clearly the Communist Party would fall after that. Biden's not willing to say those things to exert American power and to preserve peace and stability.
But isn't it correct, if you're looking at it from the Chinese point of view, Gordon, that if the Americans were going to do something like that, they would have done it 2 years ago at the start of all this COVID business, when basically China tanked the entire global economy, killed millions of people. The only country to emerge from 2020 with actual GDP growth was China. Everybody, the United Kingdom, I think it fell by 12% in the last quarter of 2020. So if you were going to pull something like that, you would have done it 2 years ago. And the fact that nobody could bring themselves to decouple from China after millions of people are dead, surely would lead you to believe, if you were looking at this from the Politburo's point of view, that they're certainly not going to bother doing that over whether you help out your pal in Moscow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As of today, 973,000 Americans have perished from this disease. 6,050,000 or so have perished around the world. And these are people who would not have died had China been acting responsibly. Xi Jinping deliberately spread this disease beyond China's borders. He lied about contagiousness, and while he was locking down his own countries, and I know lockdowns are controversial, but by locking down his own country, he was telling the world he thought that that was an effective way to stop disease. Well, while he was locking down his own country, he was pressuring other countries to accept arrivals from China without restrictions, without quarantines. And those arrivals are the ones who spread a disease that should have been confined to the central part of China to the entire world. So yes, all of those 6 million deaths, there are murders, and we did nothing. And Biden is clearly not interested in talking to Beijing about what it did. But this is almost 1 million Americans have been murdered, and yet Biden doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, and we were just talking with David Starkey about Jamaica and these politicians who want reparations for slavery 2 or 3 centuries ago. There's a much better case for China paying reparations for what it did 2 years ago. And yet, because Biden has never been tough with them on that, why do you think that is? I mean, we all know about the Hunter Biden laptop. And if you look at the emails on there, about 10% for the big guy, i.e. Joe Biden gets his cut of all these shady deals too. You have to figure that whatever the worst email on Hunter Biden's laptop is, the guys back on the Politburo have actually got emails and texts with Joe's address on it that are 1,000 times worse. Do you think he's just too corrupted to stand up to them?
I think that that's one reason. The other is that Hunter Biden's a troubled individual by his own admission. He's been on Chinese soil. I'm sure that if he did anything compromising there, the Ministry of State Security has compromising video. So he's also, the President of the United States is also subject to blackmail. If we go back to November 2020, Di Dongsheng, a Beijing academic, was live streaming a very important conference to the rest of China. And he was talking about the influence that Beijing had over the incoming Biden administration. And he talked about Hunter Biden, people laughed. But he was also talking about how in Democratic administrations, Democratic Party administrations, that China was able to use its influence on Wall Street to determine outcomes at the highest levels of the American political system. So there's that. But also, of course, Biden wants China's cooperation on climate change. He wants an Iran nuclear deal. And these are things that Biden believes he needs Beijing's help on. So you put a lot of reasons together, and it shows that China has extraordinary influence in the Oval Office.
Well, I'm sure that Vladimir Putin appreciates having one friend among the international jet set who he can still call. Thank you very much, Gordon. Thanks a lot. You know more about this stuff than almost anyone, and you've seen what's happening coming a long, long time. Good to see you. In our closing moments, let's go stump in the sign. What do we got here? Daryl tweets, Given the Duke of Cambridge's apology about slavery, in fairness to His Royal Highness, he didn't actually apologise. He didn't say sorry. He said sorrow. And these may appear to be subtle distinctions, but they're ones that the speechwriters go over back and forth a zillion times. So he didn't actually apologise for slavery. I don't believe the Duke of Cambridge has in fact been a big-time slaver. If you know where his slave plantation is, do let me know. But I think he's in the clear on that one. And by the way, I think there's something rather contemptible about apologising for things you aren't even responsible for. It's moral. Bill Clinton got this thing going, where he'd take to going around all over the world. He'd be doing these apology tours through Africa and all the rest of it for things he hadn't done and bore no responsibility for. Whereas what he did with all those women in the Oval Office, Kathleen Willey, he was actually responsible for, but good luck getting an apology out of him for that. Anyway, Darrell then says, do you think it's about time people in power spend a little more time and energy trying to stop modern slavery than something that happened 200 years ago? Bingo, Darrell, you win the big prize, because people should be addressing the problems of this idea that somehow we're supposed to be impressed by our leaders when they keep apologising for things that happened hundreds of years ago. On that scale, I mean, I apologise for the Black Death. Do I get any kudos for that? Yeah, I feel really terrible about it, and I apologise for it. Was it my fault? Linda says, what has happened with the Canadian truckers? Well, Justin disgracefully brought in his emergency powers. It's all gone quiet, and I was glad to see Euro MPs denouncing him in the European Parliament when he was there the other day. He shouldn't be acceptable in polite society, and we'll get back on that story. That'll do it. Never fear. Dan Wootton has a thoroughly thumping Thursday for 2 swinging groovy hours coming up. Stay safe, stay free.
Good evening. Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow will be remarkably similar to today. Basically dry and sunny almost across the board, and again a bit of a chilly start. High pressure is continuing to dominate our weather. It's been slowly moving back in, and now it's here. It's going to last not just through Friday but even into the weekend, so plenty more sunshine to be had. A little bit misty and murky overnight. We've seen a bit more cloud today across Scotland and Northern Ireland, even 1 or 2 showers here through the evening, but they are fading away. The mist and fog could thicken up across Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, parts of eastern England could also turn a little misty, and certainly it will be pretty chilly once more. Temperatures there in Birmingham close to freezing at 1 Celsius, 2 or 3 in Aberdeen, and certainly rural areas will start a little frosty on Friday morning, but plenty of sunshine to come during Friday. Mist and fog could take a while to clear from Northern Ireland. There will be thicker cloud across Shetland, and a little bit of rain is likely here. And in the afternoon, the small chance of the odd shower for Northern Ireland, Wales and Northern England. But for most, it's sunny and warm. Look at those temperatures, 17 in Hull, 18 in Birmingham. 19, 20 is possible in 1 or 2 places. It will be a little cooler on Friday on the coast of East Anglia and Kent, with a bit more of a breeze picking up here, and that will strengthen further along the south coast as we head into the weekend. Still that weather front bringing some cloud and patchy drizzle across the Northern Isles into Saturday morning as well. And again, we could see some mist and fog patches forming, and it will be a chilly start to the weekend. But the sun will soon get to work and lift those temperatures. Plenty of sunshine during Saturday. Staying fairly cloudy, perhaps across Shetland, and some coast may be a little misty and cool, but generally temperatures widely again into the mid or even high teens in that strengthening sunshine. More to come on Sunday as well. It's looking dry, fine and sunny. Yes, the mornings will be chilly this weekend, but it's going to be warm in the afternoons.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time